A very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Aftab Naim, and thanks for joining with us today for the final day of the second phase of Robotics 2021, brought to you by the IEEE Robotics and Automation Society of the University of Peradeniya, the student chapter of one of the most recognized and respected global organizations in the robotic and automation industry. In the previous sessions, we discussed about sensor fusion, estimated design, and robot simulations. Speaking of simulations, I'm sure that some of you have already begun working on your robot for the VBOTS evaluation task. We are happy to announce that the prize for the best robot will be a MagicBit board, which is a tiny programmable computer. Being a Sri Lankan-made product, it is powered by a dual-core processor. Its modular design allows you to plug and play a variety of sensors, making it ideal to be used in different IoT projects. It is also beginner-friendly as it can be programmed in languages like Arduino and MicroPython. If you want to get your hands on this valuable prize, keep working and make your robot to be the fastest. With your experience in simulations, it is no news that getting a robot to move fast with precision is not an easy thing. That is why we will be discussing today about motion control for robotic applications. We will take a closer look into modeling, controller designing, problem faced when designing these controllers, those solutions, and how we could implement these controllers inside microprocessors. So today, to guide us in our quest of knowledge, we have with us a distinguished personality from the engineering faculty of the University of Peradeniya as our guest speaker. He is a professor in electrical and electronic engineering. He graduated from the University of Peradeniya in the year 2000, obtaining his Bachelor of Science in Engineering with first-class honors. Then he obtained his technical licentiate and PhD degrees in electrical engineering from the Royal Institute of Technology, Sweden, in years 2003 and 2006, respectively. He joined back with the University of Peradeniya in 2006, and he has been working in control robotics and automation areas since then. He has made over 50 peer-reviewed scientific publications, and his H index is 11. Currently, he is the advisor to the student chapter of the IEEE Industry Application Society of the University of Peradeniya. He has been the director of the Engineering Design Center from years 2016 to 2018, and he is the founder director of the Engineering Technology Incubation Center in the Faculty of Engineering, University of Peradeniya. It is with great pleasure we welcome Dr. Lilantha Samaranayake. Thank you, sir, for being so generous with your time and being here with us today to broaden our understanding on motion control for robotic applications. Before handing over the session to our speaker, I have a few announcements to be made to all our participants. We will be displaying a link in the chat box through which you can direct your questions to us. We will make sure to take them into discussion during the Q&A session. So without further delay, I cordially invite Dr. Lilantha Samaranayake to carry on with the session. Over to you, sir. Sir, you're on mute, sir.
Yep. Good evening, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I'll be covering the motion control for robotics application topic this evening. So under this, I would like to scope this talk on to undergraduates. So I will cover modeling of essential components, then classical controller design and implementation aspects of controllers in the context of robotics applications, mainly focusing on undergraduates. So I hope the audience consists of undergraduates. I don't mind the postgraduates, but not beyond that. So it's mainly focused on the undergraduates. And these are the contents I have planned today. It's an extensive list. However, I will concentrate on more important parts out of this, and I will quickly go through some of the slides which are not very difficult to digest. So basically, I will be covering the modeling aspects of essential components, consisting of gear trains, DC motors, geared motors, linear actuators, and H-bridge consisting of power electronics. And as robot platforms, I'll be focusing on the tricycle model and differential mobile robot, which are very famous among competitions nowadays. And then when it comes to controller design, I'll be talking about mainly type 0 and type 1 systems corresponding to speed control and position control in robotics. Then I'll be talking about the classical controllers: proportional integral, proportional derivative, proportional integral and derivative, PI, PD, and PID controllers. And I will show you how we can apply these in a very simple robot manipulator application, which is a two-linked manipulator. And I'll talk a little bit about nonlinear controllers, how to apply them in your applications. Then one other ambiguity where people get lost is what am I to do if I don't know the transfer function of the plant or the thing that I'm going to control. So there I will touch upon the topics tuning unknown systems, tuning controller parameters for unknown systems. And then particularly, I'll be addressing some of the practical concerns which are given in green color here. And also some of the concerns in the implementation of controllers. Probably the time will not be enough to cover beyond that, but if need arises, I can do that in a later, in a separate session. Right. So let's start with the modeling part, which is quite familiar to you people who are working in the in the robotics field. So now the object that I am going to model is a gear train. In this, I have given a picture of a motor where people in the robotics domain are very much familiar with. It's a geared servo motor. Mostly these things are DC motors. Sometimes you get stepper motors as well. And these motors come up with a gear train. Why we put a gear train? Motors are typically high-speed devices, whereas the motion profiles that we need are smaller compared to the speed of the motor. The motor may run at 1000 RPM, but what you want is 100 RPM or less, right? So you need a reduction gearbox to do that. Now, putting the reduction gearbox is not the problem, but how to incorporate that in the model if we want to control it precisely. Now, I am focusing on not just simple control, but more focused, precise level of control to instate such level of control. And whatever the complexity that you can get inside the gearbox, you have an input and you have an output, right? In between, you may have two gear wheels or many gear wheels. Now, those who have studied mechanical engineering will agree that there are many sophisticated gear train arrangements. Whatever it is, it has one input shaft, one output shaft, and a gear ratio, right? So what I am talking is that kind of a simple model, which is good enough. And later you will see the advantages of, in addition to reduction of speed and amplification of the torque, you get other advantages as well, I will get to that later. Now, from the geometry, if I have two geared wheels meshed with radius R1 and R2 with N1 number of teeth and N2 number of teeth like this, I can prove from geometry that R1 to R2 ratio is N1 to N2, the number of teeth. And also the distance traveling along the circumferences by an angular displacement of one wheel by an angle θ1 will give me R1 θ1 along the periphery, which should be equal to R2 θ2, the movement by the other wheel. Otherwise, you cannot maintain meshing. So if I put this together, and if I take the derivatives of this one, because θ1 changes with time, θ2 changes with time. So R1 dθ1 by dt is equal to R2 dθ2 by dt, which is the angular velocity ω1 and ω2. So if I put this relationship, R1 over R2 is equal to θ2 over θ1 is equal to ω2 over ω1. So you have one relationship here, one relationship there, and you can put them together. In addition, if I assume that this particular block is loss-free, I can assume that input power, which is torque into speed, is equal to output power, which is again torque into speed. And from that, I can get the torque relationship. Practically, this may not be exactly correct, but for modeling purposes, this is accurate enough for us to get the relationship. So we simply model, we combine these three equations, 1, 2, and 3, and put this long equation. And that will be used for the modeling purpose. Now, typically, you guys who have been working on robotics projects, this is one DC servo motor with a gearbox attached to it. And perhaps in some machines, you get the encoder also on the other side. So we have an arrangement similar to this. If this is the shaft connected load, J2, and if this is J1 is the motor armature, the housing will have the friction components, viscous friction and static friction. So we can model these components consisting of the torque applied on the wheel. Here on this wheel it is T2, and this wheel it is T1. So for the T2, for this case, I can take the driving torque T2 minus the resistive torque from the viscous friction B2 dθ2 by dt minus the Coulomb friction FC2 angular speed divided by its modulus. So it is basically 1 or minus 1 is equal to the accelerating torque, that is J2 times d squared θ2 by dt squared. And then same thing can be applied to this wheel, the other wheel. So if you do that, the torque applied by the motor minus the torque of the gear wheel minus the resistive forces, resistive torques. This is the viscous friction torque, and this is the Coulomb friction torque, is equal to the inertia times the second derivative of the angle θ1. So you can combine the torque relationship using this relation and also the angle relationship as I showed you earlier, and come up with this relationship. The torque in the electric motor is equal to the J equivalent times d squared θ1 or dt squared plus B equivalent d θ1 by dt plus the Coulomb friction equivalent and the modulus. So this is either +1 or -1, where our equivalent values of inertia are n1 over n2 squared times J2, and here n1 over n2 squared times B1, and here n1 over n2 now. And the advantage I wanted to say with the reduction gearbox is this: whatever the amount that is given here is multiplied by a small number, which is squared even, and then added. So the equivalent inertia is predominantly J1. So the other purpose of this gearbox is it is minimizing the impact on the load side on the motor, right? So that's acting as a mechanical filter as well. So, so that's the advantage of going for a geared wheel instead of a direct driven wheel. So nowadays, power electronics industry has developed that so that we can go for direct driven wheels, which is, on a way, it is a good thing. But on the other hand, if the terrain is rough and you have to work on unknown torque disturbances, it is always advisable to go for a wheel with a gearbox. So that is the application side of it, right? Otherwise, if you are moving on a very smooth platform, the direct driven wheels are fine. Then how do we drive this gear? It's always connected to a motor, which I have shown earlier. Now, what do we get inside the motor? Of course, I am focusing only on DC motors because this is not the forum to talk about advanced motor details. So in a DC motor, what you have is two terminals for you to supply the direct current. And then you get the brushes. Brushes are connected to the commutator, and the commutator bars are connected to the windings of the armature. And then the armature rotates in a magnetic field. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, motors used in robotics obtain their magnetic field through permanent magnets. So basically, you have a constant field in the motor. Therefore, you can represent the motor by this simple model, where RA is the armature resistance, LA is the armature inductance, and you have a back electromotive force which comes into effect when the motor turns under a flux. So with that, we can apply a simple model. And these are the model equations. The applied voltage is equal to the resistive voltage drop plus the drop across the inductors, that is L times dIA by dt plus the back electromotive force. And then if you take the Laplace transform of this, you get V of S minus EA of S, that is back EMF. 1 over RA plus LA is the current. And in the time domain, your back electromotive force is proportional to the speed, and the constant of proportionality is KE. And in these machines that you work in robotics, we have constant field, therefore this is constant. Otherwise, this can be different. This can also be changed depending on the motor arrangement, but in robotics, you can take that as a constant. So if you refer to a data sheet, sometimes this is given as volts per RPM. Most of the time, the data sheets refer this in volts per RPM. So you have to be careful when you are taking those things into consideration, because RPM is not a SI unit. You have to convert that into radians per second. So these type of little things people forget and end up with wrong calculations where ultimately your controller doesn't work, right? So be mindful. And then if you go to the mechanical side of it, the torque applied by the motor and any disturbance torque minus the viscous friction torque is giving the acceleration. So this is the equivalent inertia times the acceleration. So Laplace transform of that will give me this equation. And there are also, again, the torque produced by the motor is proportional to the current through the windings, and constant of proportionality is KT. And this usually is given by Newton meters per ampere. So there's no harm. The data sheet value you can take, but again, you need to look at this one, because sometimes this is given as, for small motors, Newton centimeters, right? Newton centimeters per ampere. So there again, KT, you have to be careful. And then in a block diagram, you can represent the system in this form. So this is starting from the supply voltage all the way up to the speed after the gear train, because the inertia and the viscous friction are the equivalent values which I showed you earlier, right? So that thing is now modeled already into the system. And then how do we supply here? Now, earlier, when we didn't have any power electronics, we used to use relays. That was a long time ago, just relays, and you have to energize the relays in such a way that you turn on the relay so that positive voltage is applied on the motor, and you turn on another relay where the terminals are reversed. So the motor rotates in the opposite direction likewise. But nowadays you don't do that. Instead, we use switch mode converters, and basically what you have there is a power electronic leg like this, right? You can have separate components like the MOSFETs that you are familiar with, IRA 540 or something like that. And then you need the freewheeling diodes here. Freewheeling diodes are typically, I'm sorry, this is gone down, it should be here. Freewheeling diodes are sometimes, if you go for a package, included package like this one, for example, included inside. If not, you have to apply, you have to solder from outside. But when you are doing that, you have to make sure that the diodes that you are fixing from outside are faster than the diodes which are already inside the module, right? So that thing you have to be careful when you are doing that. So whatever it is, now you get an arrangement like this, where the idea is you compare a control voltage, right? This is the input, and then that voltage is compared with the triangular waveform. So whether the control voltage is greater than the triangle voltage or less than the triangle voltage, you change the gate signals to these switches. These switches, depending on the power rating, they could be bipolar junction transistors, BJTs, or they could be MOSFETs, they could be even JFETs, whatever the type of transistor. So what I mean is they could be field effect transistors or other type current control devices. The arrangement is something like this, and that is the one which gives us the model. So when you have Q logic high, you fire this one, turn on that one, and when it is lower, you fire the other switch. And because of the inductance of the motor, the current will continue through the diode when you are switching on this one, right? So we want to get a relationship between the control voltage and the voltage applied on the motor, the average voltage applied on the motor. So basically, you have the DC motor, which we have seen the model in the block diagram, and also in that slide, I forgot to tell, I had the state space representation also. Whatever it is, you have to model it correctly. And now the question is how to model this part, right? Now, what do we have there? We have a triangular waveform, and we have the control voltage. When the control voltage is higher than the triangle voltage, then the logic is high. If not, the logic is low. So that is what we have. So during the logic high time, the duration we are taking as the on time. So we take the average on time. So Q logic, QDT over from time t to t plus t. This capital T triangle is the period of the triangular waveform. So if you evaluate this integration, you will get the on time divided by t triangle is equal to the duty ratio. So in other words, your on time is the duty ratio times the T triangle, and usually we work with not the period time, but instead the frequency of this triangular waveform. So during this time, the on time, the applied voltage becomes VDC, and during off time, the applied voltage becomes 0, and we can calculate an average voltage, and that is the voltage which is applied on the motor. So the voltage applied there is going to be the average during the this period T triangle from 0 to D T triangle VDC dt. So that becomes D, the duty ratio, times the DC voltage, right? So we have a simple arrangement that depends on the duty ratio. So let's get into the small signal model of that. So the idea is when we change the control voltage, right? So this is the scenario when the control voltage is at minus triangular voltage. We get duty ratio 0, and then if we increase to midpoint between minus V triangle and plus V triangle, the duty ratio becomes 0.5, and if it is at plus V triangle, it becomes 1, right? So this is simple y is equal to mx plus c type equation. So your y is the d, the duty ratio, that is equal to the gradient here is this height, which is 1 divided by 2 times V triangle times VC, plus the intercept here is 0.5. So this is the duty equation against VC. So we have a mapping from VC to D, right? So that's the mapping from VC to D. So now we need to convert this into the voltage. So the supply voltage is 0.5 times VDC plus VDC over 2 times V triangle VC. Now this is the DC model. So we need to apply a perturbation, that is a small change in VC and small change in VS. So that's the perturbed version. Minus VDC will give us the small signal model. So the small signal model is the supplied voltage is equal to VDC over 2 times V triangle times the control voltage, right? So now we have a model such that our input is the control voltage, which is calculated by the controller, which gets translated into the supply voltage through this relationship. Now, this is the battery or the VCC of your power supply, right? And then this is two times the triangular waveform that is used in the power electronics. So we need to know these two parameters in order to determine how much voltage is applied on the motor, right? This is determined by the controller. So the transfer function, therefore, is VS over VC is VDC over 2 times the triangular waveform. Now, there is one point here in the calculations. We assume that the voltage is from 0 to VDC, right? So the model here is VDC over 2 times V triangle. So in order to relax that assumption, for example, the motor that we considered with a single leg cannot be reversed. So, but in robotics, we need to reverse it. So to reverse, there are 2 ways. That is to introduce 2 legs like this, which is forming the H bridge. And at the midpoint of the H bridge, you connect the motor that you want to control. And then what you do is when you apply Q on one leg, inverted Q is applied on the other leg, right? So at a given time, when this is on, this is on. When this one is on and that one is on. So Thereby, you ensure that the average voltage is applied on the motor as per the control voltage here, right? In this case, you can go for minus VDC to plus VDC. So you can reverse the motor. So here, again, the duty ratio, the DC equation we can write like this from our earlier derivation. For the other leg, it should be 1 minus dA, so it is this one. So you can take the voltage at this point as VA and voltage at this point as VB. So what matters is the voltage applied on the terminal of the motor, which is VA minus VB. So VA minus VB in this case is VDC over V triangle times the control voltage. Now there is a slight difference. The 2 is missing in this case. So when you have bipolar, you have only 1 as the coefficient there. So there is a slight difference that is without, you get it without 2. So whatever it is, now you have to note the fact that the model is different and it needs this voltage, which you need to extract from the data sheet of the drive circuit. And also when you change the supply voltage, you need to adjust this transfer function. It's not a complex transfer function. It doesn't introduce any poles, zeros, anything. It's just a gain. But if you don't know the gain correctly, all your tuning will be wrong. That's why I am stressing on that. So there's another arrangement how you are doing this. That is, instead of taking the inverse of the logic, you can take the control voltage and apply the inverse of the control voltage, and thereby also you can drive the H-bridge in a slightly different manner, but even in that case, you end up with the same model transfer function as in the previous case, right? So let me take this out, otherwise. Sorry. Right. So ultimately, the model remains VDC over V triangle. Then, how do we connect it to the power electronics? Can't I get rid of this? Anyway. Right. So this is the application. Now you have modeled this part and you have modeled all the way up to this part, right? So if I put it into practice, this is my model of the gearbox and the motor. So this is my converter model. And in addition, I may have to do some control. Probably I need to deliver a certain amount of torque or certain amount of speed or a particular angle, whatever it is, that becomes the outermost loop, right? So typically when you buy a drive circuit, you are given those options, right? So if you want to implement a torque control, then you need to get some idea about the torque, which is typically done using the current relationship, because I mentioned to you that torque produced is proportional to the current. So if you know the constant of proportionality, and if you measure the current, then you get an idea how much torque is produced, right? So you get the torque feedback, and this is the torque reference. So you can calculate the torque error, and that is fed into a torque controller, which is providing the control signal here for the converter, right? So that is one end of the application. And then you can do the same thing for the speed, because in that case, you need to look at the back electromotive force, for example. From that, you can calculate the speed. back electromotive force is a voltage, and then you can calculate the speed, or else you can put a speed sensor here, and then from the speed sensor you can calculate how much, you can measure what the speed is, which I have shown in the next slide. And before moving to the next slide, this is the kind of electronics that you probably get in a drive circuit. If you open up a drive circuit, you get the power electronic switches dealing with these parts, and then you have this big resistors to dissipate whatever the heat that is regenerated, because most of the time when you decelerate, some amount of energy is fed back into the source. So these motors, they don't expect you to operate in all 4 quadrants. Instead, the energy that is released there is just burnt as heat, right? That's why you get these big resistors on board. And so the rest is power electronics and the control. And most of these controllers are analog controllers. Sometimes nowadays you have microprocessors on board inside the motor drives, but they are very expensive. So most of the time we don't use them. We just use analog controllers. And the next slide, I will show you how this can be applied for speed control. So there we measure the speed and you compare it with the reference speed, and this is sent through a speed controller, which determines VC, the control voltage, which gets compared with the triangular waveform here, right? So this is how the DC motor is connected to the H bridge switch mode converter, right? Next, let me take you through a simple robotics application. Which is another familiar platform where it has got 3 wheels, and it's not just a differential robot. I will come to the differential robot application in a short while. But what you get here is instead you get a driving wheel which does the steering as well, and these are free wheels. So this is a vehicle which can go in any direction. There are advantages and disadvantages of this kind of a platform if you happen to use. The advantage is you get 1 wheel less than a 4-wheeler, and also your maneuverability is it depends on how you design the rest of the system. It could be higher because you can take certain large angles with very small radius. However, you are at the risk of reducing the stability, right? So typically 3-wheeled vehicles are having stability issues. These stability issues normally overcome by changing the direction of motion, right? Now, this kind of a vehicle, instead of putting the single wheel in the front, if you put the single wheel in the back, most of the stability issues are gone, right? But now I am not considering that. Instead, I am considering this as the front wheel and these 2 are the rear wheels. So on a reference frame fixed to the platform, I have moving the vehicle in that direction. So I can take the velocity in that direction with respect to the robot frame. Vxr is if the linear velocity of this wheel is Vs cos alpha, if you resolve the velocity in this direction, it is Vs cos alpha. Then in that direction, it is 0. And the angle of rotation is Vs over d sine alpha. That is around the center of gravity. So Vs sine alpha is the velocity resolve component in that direction divided by the distance here, right? And also we can use the geometry. If this is alpha, if this is 90 degrees, this is 90 minus alpha. So d tan pi by 2 minus alpha is equal to this radius, right? So this is the instantaneous center of rotation. Radius to that is capital R. Capital R can be given as d times tan pi by 2 minus alpha, right? So the angular velocity of the robot frame with respect to the global frame, which is this one, xg0 yg, is therefore r times omega s over d squared plus r squared square root. So if I divide and multiply by d, I can separate it like this. So this actually is sine alpha. And this quantity is the Vs, the linear velocity of this wheel. The rotation, the linear velocity meaning the velocity at the touching point. So that velocity divided by d times sine alpha gives me the angular velocity with respect to the global frame. So if I transfer everything to the global coordinate frame, which is this one, that is the frame that we are sitting on. Now, all these equations are valid as long as you are on the robot. But when we want to do remote control, we have to get an idea where the robot with respect to us, we are in the global frame, right? So we need to do this translation. So the velocity in the x direction, which is x dot, if I take the coordinate of the center of gravity as x comma y in the global coordinate frame, so then x dot is equal to Vs cos alpha. Vs cos alpha is the velocity in that direction, and resolve it further on xg. So Vs cos alpha cos theta. Similarly, other one in the other direction, quadrature to that is Vs cos alpha sin theta. And the theta dot is Vs over d times sin alpha, which is r times omega s over d sin alpha. So if I consider these kinematic equations for the control, now these relationships can be used by us to convert our desired velocities into the velocities at the wheel of the robot and the steering angle. So that is what is done in the next slide. So all what I have done is, if this is the desired velocity in the x direction of the robot, and if this is the desired velocity of the robot in the y direction, and if theta dot d is the angle, the orientation, then these results hold from the previous derivation. From that, I can say that the desired velocity of the turning wheel, that is the steering wheel velocity, rotational velocity, I can express like this. Right? So this is the desired robot velocity translated to steering wheel rotational speed. So the steering wheel rotation I am talking about, not the steering. And then this is the steering angle, right? So steering angle in the sense, let me use the tool. Just move this wheel. Move this wheel this way or the other, right? That is steering. But rotating around this axis is omega, right? So that is the difference. Right. And similarly, I can derive the angle alpha. So I know the desired speed of rotation of the front wheel and desired steering angle. So why I did all this to show, why I did all these derivations is to show you two interesting properties. That this problem is now, it's a matter of controlling the speed of the front wheel, rotational speed, and position of the steering. So this is a, first one is a speed control problem, and the second one is a position control problem. So if I take the first one, what do we have? We have the front wheel. It has got a motor, probably a gearbox, and a drive. So we need to apply velocity control from our controller, right? And we do the speed control. That means we want the output of the speed output of the motor to follow the desired speed. Similarly, for the steering, we want the actual steering angle to follow the desired steering angle. If we have these two, then it will ensure that I have the desired x direction velocity and desired y direction velocity and the desired angle speed, right? So the required yaw will be ensured if you do all that. So now what we have done so far is to translate our practical problem of controlling a tricycle into a speed control and position control problems, right? So next, what I'm going to show is how to solve this problem. Okay, before that, I would like to add this as well. That is another very familiar platform, which is differential robot. I think if you do robotics, especially mobile robotics, this is the point that many of you start. Sometimes if you are not familiar with any of the control things, people start with stepper motors even, because that doesn't need any controller or there's no feedback, right? I can remember in 2006 when I returned from the PhD, there were a couple of students, I still remember their names. They were coming after me how to drive this kind of a robot using stepper motors. So I think it was me who made them the motor drive circuit as well. Anyway, so that's history. So what you have there is basically if you look at it from the modeling point of view, we have a robot and two wheels, and the wheels are driven by geared motors like this, right? There can be other arrangement batteries, power electronics, etc., and all sorts of other sensors. So this is what we have. So again, here also the posture of the robot is determined by, even in the previous one, it is the same thing, x, theta, and y, and the control inputs are v and w. So you have the kinematic model. Before that, you can use the geometry also. Here again, the instantaneous center of rotation, ICC, is there, and depending on the radius you can, and the fixed distance between the wheels, the right side wheel should have linear velocity, which is given by r plus L by 2 times omega. Omega is the vehicle speed around an axis passing through ICC. And similarly, the left side speed should be omega times r. This is r minus L by 2 times omega. So the left side angular velocity of the wheel is can be related to the left side linear velocity, and similarly the right side. And from that you can derive omega is the difference with linear velocity difference between the wheels divided by the distance between the wheels, and the velocity of the vehicle is the average velocity of these two, right? And then form the kinematic equation like this, and then there is a non-holonomic constraint, that is the vehicle can't move in this direction, right? So if you put that condition, we can get another equation, and this is little into analysis. So the radius, when the two velocities are equal, the radius goes to infinity. That means it is moving in a straight line. Otherwise, it will turn in one direction, right? So this is the very advantageous feature here, because, for example, if you start rotating in the opposite direction, r becomes 0. That means it is turning around this one. You don't need the steering for this. Just by turning the wheels in the opposite direction by the same velocity, you can turn the robot. So the turning radius is 0, right? That's one reason why this is preferred in many of the applications. Probably you have seen this monocycle. A modern version of that has been there, but it's not very popular anymore for different reasons. So many of the applications you have this, and I'm sure you must have tried this one by yourself. So the model is this one. There again, we can write some equations. So here, we know that the left side velocity is r, the radius, times the omega L, radius of the wheel. The right side also you can write like that. And the angular velocity around the axis passing through the instantaneous center of rotation is this, and the average velocity of the vehicle is given by that. So x direction velocity is v cos theta, and y direction is v sin theta, and theta dot is omega, right? So here, from the global reference frame, we know the reference value for x dot, and we know the reference value for y dot, because we have been given a task in the computation. Okay, move the robot from this point A to point B in this velocity or in this time or whatever it is. So that is the thing that we know. So our variables, we need to translate it into the domain where we can match them with the specifications. Otherwise, this guesswork will not work all the time. Might work, but it will not work all the time. So we translate them in such a way that from these equations, we know that x dot squared plus y dot squared square root is v. And if we know the reference speeds in x and y direction, we know the velocity reference. And then theta dot reference is omega reference. You can take like this, right? Then these reference values you can translate into the velocities in the left-hand side and the velocity in the right-hand side. So this is the angular velocity of the right side wheel, and this is the angular velocity of the left side wheel. So if you have these two, then we know how to rotate the motor. So there again, what we have is we have the motor probably with the gearbox, and then the then the power electronics, you measure the speed, compare it with this omega r ref, which is calculated here. Now, in that calculation, you have the desired Vref. Desired Vref we have calculated using desired velocity in the x and y direction. And it has got omega ref. Omega ref, again, we have calculated like that. So we have basically made use of these specifications in determining how much omega in the left and right directions. Now, these may be running online. Still, you need to do this calculation. Otherwise, it will not do a proper precise controlling task. So left side and right side basically have block diagrams of this nature. Right. So what we have seen so far is what we get as the problem in hand is a simple velocity control problem in the differential robot case, and in the tricycle we have velocity control as well as position control, right? So let me apply the known control theory into it. Is it a question now? Okay. Right. So let us get back to the DC motor model. Now, with this mechanical part and the electrical part combined, you end up with a second order system that you can't avoid, right? So typically, it is a second order type 0 system. If you do speed control, if you do position control, then another integration step adds. So it becomes a third order type 0 system. Third order type 1 system. Sorry, it should be type 1. Right. And the important point here is sometimes this mechanical time constant, which is J over B, produces a much slower pole than the electrical time constant, which is L over R, right? So in this particular second order case, one pole is close to the origin, other pole is far away from the origin. I will tell you now these values we have identified, we have applied system identification on a motor that we have in the lab and identified these numbers KE, KT, BM, JM, LA, RA, which gives me one pole at -3 and another pole at -370 in SI units. So you can see this pole is 100 times slower than this one, right? So if you have this level of separation between the poles, the faster pole can be neglected. In control systems, if you have 10 times difference, then the faster one can be neglected, provided that you handle the gain correctly, right? So this kind of speed control problem, if you have this level of separation in the poles, then can be reduced to a first order system, right? First order type 0 system, and this one then becomes second order type 1, right? But provided you can make this separation, and it works most of the time, especially for the motors that are in robotics, because they are meant to work like that. So the reduced one becomes a transfer function of this nature, and we want to do speed control of that, right? Now we know from control theory that if you want to have a zero steady state error for step input or higher order input, then we should have type 1 system in the forward transfer function. That means GS should be type 1. From the plant equation, the reduced order 1, which is a first order type 0 system. So you need to add an S. How do we do this addition of S? You need a PI control, right? So when you add this PI controller, your GS-CS product is going to be one having 0 given by at S is equal to minus KI over KP, and you get pole at S is equal to 0 and 0, another pole at S is equal to minus 2Z omega n. So thereby you make sure that it is type 1. So and that is achieved through this Kp plus Ki over S, which is a low pass filter. And the next slide shows how the influence of Kp and Ki on the controller behavior. Now, when you increase Kp, you can see now this is a low pass kind of filter, the PI controller, and the cutoff frequency goes down when the gain, while the gain also increases. The gain increases when you increase Kp, but at the same time, cutoff frequency goes down. And also when you increase Ki, the cutoff frequency increases and the gain doesn't change. So this is how the parameters change. So roughly, at least, you have to have this in mind when you apply a PI controller for speed control kind of application. You have to have an idea what is going on there, right? So this is about speed control. Now, if I go to the other problem, which is position control. Now, in the position control, the moment you call it position control, you have S here from the plant, right? That is because you put position measurement. So there's no need that we add type 1 because it's already type 1. So there you add PD control. So the position control we do using PD control. But by nature, this controller is improper because numerator power is higher than the denominator. So in order to solve that problem, we introduce this kind of an arrangement, right? Where gamma is much less than 1. So this is a comparison of PD and PD gamma controllers. So we make sure that the additional pole has no significant influence on the rest of the operations, right? So whatever it is, the PD controller, you can see that it is high pass filter, right? It allows high frequency stuff. So the moment you introduce a PD controller, you add some more headache into the problem. That is, you bring in noise. The system becomes vulnerable to noise with the addition of the PD controller. Therefore, you have to make sure you do it correctly, right? So that's the practical side of it. So when you try to do it, you have to make sure that you put proper filters into your sensors. Otherwise, PD will not work. And this is the influence of the gain of the PD controller on the overall operation of the controller. When you increase Kp, the gain increases and the cutoff frequency also increases. And when Kd is increased, gain doesn't change, but the cutoff frequency reduces. So one is increasing, other one is decreasing. So you have to manage the two, right? There are different ways of doing this design, like pole zero cancellation, pole placement, and various things. But I am not going to cover all these things here. But this is, I am covering the essentials for the robotics. And especially another advantage of going for PD is you get the freedom to independently control the two profiles. Because most of the time, the problems that we get in robotics involve position reference as well as velocity reference, right? And the PD control allows us to, if you can put another sensor to measure the rate of change of angle or the velocity, then I can take that and take the KD, the derivative part gain, to deal with, where I completely eliminate the derivative term. But still, I am implementing PD control, because this time this D comes from here, from the reference there and the measurement there. So I am not differentiating anything. I'm just taking the measurement and I'm comparing it with the reference, right? So that's another simple way of getting around many of the problems associated with PD control. You put the sensor instead of, in addition to the angle sensor, you put angular velocity sensor as well, and you take the profile from this one, for example. But now, calculating theta ref is a mathematical operation. So theta dot is also mathematical operation. That's fine, right? So that's another advantage. And also, I will show you where this kind of a thing is applied. Now, this is a simple robot manipulator. It just has 2 links and 2 joints. 1 motor here, 1 motor there. And the point here can be expressed if I take the link length as A1 here and A2 there. So this point can be expressed as A1 cos theta, A1 sin theta. And this point, if I take this length as A2, A1 cos theta 1 plus A2 cos theta 1 plus theta 2, the x coordinate. Y coordinate is A1 sin theta 1 plus A2 sin theta 1 plus theta 2, right? I took this particular example simply because I didn't want to go into coordinate transformations and etc., which makes the life complicated for me during a limited time. But I wanted to show you something important. That's why I took this one. So that is the forward kinematics. That is basically, I express this in terms of the angles. And I can calculate the inverse kinematics, that is, given the position here, coordinates, I should be able to calculate what angles will ensure that I can reach there, right? So that is the inverse kinematics. So you use the geometric relationships to come up with the angle theta 2 and so the cos theta 2 is from the cosine formula. Cos theta 2 is x1 xy are the coordinates here, x squared plus y squared minus a1 squared minus a2 squared over 2 times a1 a2 gives me cos theta 2. That is this angle. So from that, if I take that as capital D, this you can calculate, right? Given x and y. Then from that I can calculate sine theta 2. From that I can calculate theta 2. And then I can calculate theta 1, right? Because I know this full angle, given that I know x and y, tan inverse of y over x is that full angle. And if I can reduce this bit, that means I know theta 1. So I can calculate basically theta 2 and theta 1 both. So basically it shows me what are the angles that I should move this link and that link using the motors connected here in order to reach this coordinate x and y, right? So that's a problem. That problem has been simplified to that level. So again, it is a position control problem, which we have just learned, right? So the position controlling, you have the S in the forward transfer function. So there's no need of adding a PI controller there, just PD will do the job. Now, I'm not going to stop at that point because I need to, it is not just a matter of moving it, but robotics demand how fast you move, right? So I need to look at x dot and y dot. I take the expressions for x and y obtained earlier, differentiate it once, and I get this relationship. So x dot and y dot explained in terms of theta 1 dot and theta 2 dot. And the term here is called the Jacobian. And again, it is not the correct time to deal with this Jacobian. It's an interesting topic, but this is not the right time. I'll just pass it through. And why I am using Jacobian is, given x dot and y dot, I can calculate the inverse Jacobian to find out the required angular velocities at the joints. So now I know the angle profile and the angular velocity profile. Angle profile and the angular velocity profile. If I know both, then it is a matter of translating that into a controller, which I showed earlier. Now I know the desired angle and the desired angle velocity for joint 1 and joint 2. So implement one PD controller for each joint will give me the desired profile, right? So that's the application of PT control in the industrial robot manipulator, right? Yeah, I have given this in the next slide, right? So this is what I am expected to do with that. And also, if you have a nonlinear system, still this can be used. The earlier PD part is implemented similar to that one, but the nonlinear part is added here in order to make sure that I cancel it with the nonlinear part of the controller. But only thing is, I should know the nonlinear part correctly. So system identification, nonlinear system identification is quite difficult. But if I have identified the nonlinear parts correctly, I can use the same philosophy to get away with the nonlinear part. And this type of controller we usually call aerodynamic controller, because if you look at carefully, what you have is xt double dot. This is the desired x double dot, right? The acceleration version. But here I get x tilde dot and x tilde. X tilde is the error. Desired x minus actual x, that is the error. Desired x velocity minus actual x velocity, that difference, right? This is not the time to give the derivation, but this is aerodynamic control, which you can still use, and that has a PD architecture. Now, if I take you through now, you can see why this PD control is very popular in the robotics community, right? Because robotics is mostly dealing with positions more than the velocities, but velocity is important. We deploy robots to get things done quickly sometimes, as well as we want to get things accurately. So in order to make sure both of them the PD controller can accommodate both that, right? Now I take you through a little difficult part, that is what if we cannot reduce the system. Now all this time I was on the assumption that my two poles coming from the motor are far apart so that I can neglect the faster pole. If it is not the case, I am left with this kind of a second order type 0 system. So if they have real roots, then probably I can do pole 0 cancellation or whatever it is. If it is complex, I can't use pole 0 cancellation unless I have a second order numerator in the control, right? Because if it is complex conjugate poles, then I can't cancel one of them. I have to cancel both. In order to cancel both, I have to have a numerator which is second order. How do we get that? In order to do that, we have PID control. I combine proportional integral and proportional derivative and come up with proportional integral derivative controller, which is I would say, the workhorse in control engineering in the industry. That has been there for centuries. Because, I mean, still, thanks to many research done all over the world in control systems, coming up with many new versions of controllers, control laws, theories, etc. Still, PID can challenge the performance of those new controllers with this 3-parameter controller: proportional gain, integral gain, and derivative gain. Of course, if you implement it correctly, otherwise it can lead to a disaster, right? And the additional advantage of going for this is you make sure, even if you do pole zero cancellation or not, you are introducing a pole at the origin. So you make your forward transfer function type 1. That will give you 0 steady state error. So that's a cool solution where you make sure your steady state error is 0 in addition to what you try to do. So this is the S-domain version of the controller, Kp plus KIOS times KDS. Again, you can see that it is also improper because highest power in the numerator is 2, whereas in the denominator it is 1. And so you have to give the same trick as earlier. You apply the PID gamma. The derivative part, you introduce the gamma and move it like that. And then this is how the variables are the parameters are contributing. When you increase, ideally speaking, PID is a band stop filter, right? And the gain is increasing when the bandwidth is increasing when the Kp is increasing. And this is the influence of Ki for the integral part. And that is the influence of Kd for the differential part. And there is another way of writing this down, which is going to be useful in tuning the controller if you don't know the plant. That is, I rewrite the controller in terms of the integral time and the derivative time. Integral time Ti and the derivative time Td. There are 2 ways to do the control tuning, parameter tuning. Ziegler-Nichols, these are all empirical formulas derived through experience, and these tables give you, depending on what controller structure you have, how to select them. So all what you do is you take the open loop system, apply a step and look at the step response, and then put a tangent and take the horizontal intercept and the vertical intercept, L and A respectively, and define PID parameters accordingly, right? Now, the Ziegler-Nichols tuning rules are just guidelines. It's a starting point. Depending on the problem, you need to fine tune. And I must tell that this Ziegler-Nichols is the only place where you are officially allowed to fine tune, right? That is because this is an approximate way of doing things. Same thing can be done in the frequency domain. So what you do is you make sure that your integrator and the differentiator are not working. You only put a proportional controller and increase the gain until it starts oscillating. And that gain you take as the ultimate gain, and the frequency or the period of oscillations, you take the ultimate period, and you define the controller parameters in terms of these Ku and Tu, right? So this is another way that you can tune the controller parameters. Now, whatever the method that you have followed to find the controller tuning, the controller parameters, when you try to implement the PID, PD controllers, where you have the derivative part, you run into these problems. One thing is this derivative kick. That is solely because of the differentiator. Because if you look at carefully, what you are differentiating is the error. Error is the reference minus the output. If you think about the step change in the reference, then if the system was initially at standstill, then your output may be 0 just after giving the signal. So the reference, which is a large value, minus the output, which is a very small value, divided by even a tiny number, will give you kick, which is called the derivative kick. For example, I will show you. Sorry. What we mean by derivative kick is something like this. Typically, the control signal is in this region, but corresponding to a step change, you get this kind of a spike. That's the derivative kick. Then another point is the set point tracking. Sometimes when you try to track the set points, you will get unnecessarily high overshoot. Another problem is the actuator saturation. Now, your motor has a particular input voltage beyond which it cannot accept. Whether it is 12 volt, 24 volts, 48 volts, whatever the voltage, if your controller at the end of the day determines a voltage, okay, I should have for the 48 volts motor, if it is 80 volts, that's not going to work, right? There are voltage limiters in your drive circuit that will make sure that nothing more than the power supply voltage is applied there, right? So there is a difference between what the controller calculates and what is really applied. So therefore, it will increase the error between the reference and the output, right? So that error, if you do not correct, if you have an integrator in the loop, the integrator will start counting up, and up, right? That acts as a positive feedback, and it will start counting to infinity, making the saturation worse. And we call that scenario integrator windup, right? So let's take one by one and introduce solutions. For the derivative kick problem, you simply get rid of the error here and apply only the output. So even when you have changes, step changes in the reference, doesn't matter, it won't come here because you are only putting the output. Then for the set point tracking, instead of putting the error in the proportional controller, you take fraction of the reference minus the output, right? And that lambda here is from 0 to 1. And actuator saturation and integrator windup are combined. I mean, it's a problem which you cannot separate, right? So there are anti-wind up structures if you can implement the controller in the discrete domain. For example, if you are implementing the controller in a microprocessor, then you have anti-wind up schemes. Otherwise, if the controller is in analog electronics, then you have to depend on a solution like this. There are saturation detection blocks. I mean, voltage clipping and clamping circuits can be used for saturation detection. Upon detection, now, if this is the calculated signal from the controller, and if this is what is applied there, if you take the difference like this, the moment actuator is saturating, this becomes negative. And that part is deducted from the input to the integrator. So that will make sure that the integrator will not integrate at the same rate as it is used to be without a feedback, right? So it will slow down the integration action. So this is the maximum that the analog controller can give. But if you go for the microprocessor implementation, now the proportional controller can be implemented. Simply you take the analog part and just simply convert it there. Integral part, this is the integration, and in the discrete domain, I can use the forward Euler discretization. Ik plus 1 is equal to Ik plus kph over Ti, and h is the sampling period. And the derivative controller, from the derivative controller in the previous case, I am only using the output, so no reference here. So I can come up with this formula, which ends up with this long expression, right? So if you look at the proportional part, it doesn't need memory. It takes the reference, the current value, the output current value. Integration needs memory because you put this value to this at the end. Differential controller needs memory. It uses past derivative value, present measurement, and the previous measurement. So that needs memory. Both integral part and the derivative part need memory. Proportional part does not need memory. And then how do we do the anti-wind up? So the beauty of that is the previous one. If you use forward Euler here and if you use backward Euler there, discretization, I end up with a situation that I can calculate the controller as pk plus uk plus, sorry, pk plus ik plus dk, right? Present values. And then now this is only if you are in the digital controller. If my uk is greater than the maximum value, then I limit to the maximum. If it is less than the minimum, I limit at the minimum. This is the saturation condition. And once it hits either this end or that end, you need to do one of these. One is you stop integration. That means integral equation, if you go back, keeps adding this part. This is the present error. You keep adding that. But in this case, once the saturation is detected, you don't do that. You stop it here. Or reset the integrator. That means immediately you make Ik is equal to 0 and restart the integrator. So this is the second way of doing it. And the third way is, instead of adding here, now if you look at this is a positive sign, you detect, so deduct, right? So one of these three methods can be applied as an anti-wind up scheme, right? So only thing that you have to keep in mind is this kind of anti-wind up schemes can be applied only if you are in the digital domain. If you are in the analog domain, you have to be happy with this one of these things. You still get a tuning parameter to deal with the how fast you want to get it done, but it's just one parameter that you have to come out, right? So that's those are the implementation details, and that is what I plan to cover for today. And I have taken 1.5 hours. I think it is good enough. So we can. First, I must thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to take questions if you have.
Yes, thank you, sir, for that very informative and interesting session. Our participants have sent us a few questions through the link we have provided. If there's any, sir, could you please take down the share screen so that we could share
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, our participants, they have sent us the questions. If there's anyone who has missed sending us the questions, you could now scan the QR code and send us your questions.
No?
Okay, so the first question we have got is, when using freewheeling diodes externally, why do we need to use faster diodes? Could you explain it a little bit, sir?
Yeah, freewheeling action is there for the energy to dissipate out, right? So if we are to put external diodes, it has to be faster than what is out there internal, right? Otherwise, the purpose is not served, right? I mean, if the energy is dissipated fast enough from the internal diode, we don't need any external diode.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
So the next one is, what are the motion controllers that can be used on a control and localized in autonomous underwater vehicles?
Underwater vehicles deal with the speed control. What are the controllers that can be used? Yes, underwater vehicles have, I mean, you rarely do position control. You do velocity control to obtain the movements. Whatever the motion profile, if it is velocity control, then you can go for PI control. If it is position control, you can go for PT control. I think you have got the message that if you go for position control from the plant, you have a pole coming at the origin, which makes the forward transfer function type 1. If you have type 1, then the steady state error is 0 already, right? So there's no need to add another integrator from the controller if you are doing position control. Is it clear?
Yes, sir, I think they have got it. Thank you, sir. And the next one we have got is, in case we don't know the motor characteristics, what are the methods we can use to obtain those characteristics?
Right. It's a good question. There are a couple of tests that you can do. I mean, this is the answer is twofold. One is non-parametric approach, where you apply a known input like a step or a sign or whatever, and try to match the output with a known function, right? So that is the non-parametric approach. For example, you apply a step input and then you see a exponentially growing response. You can calculate the time constant, for example. Then use that time constant to come up with the equivalent first order model, right? So that is one way of doing it, but only thing is you can't go beyond second order for that kind of approach. Then the other part of the answer is you can go for parametric system identification. That means you apply a random input and you record the output. Then you have what is called the system identification tools. Using the system identification tools, you keep on, that particular system identification tool has certain models. Let's say model 1, 2, 3, 4. Then you apply the first model and see how it fits to a different set of inputs. So if it fits, let's say, more than 90%, then you accept it. If not, you go for a little more complicated model and you repeat the process. So that is how you do the identification, if you got my point. That's basically system identification is the way to do it, which you will come to know if you do advanced control systems in the 7th semester.
Thank you, sir. And so the next question we have got is, sir, can you suggest a good reference book to study further kinematics?
Vidyasagar's robotics kinematics. There's a modeling and control. I can't remember the name, the title exactly, but I have given it in the course. Let me check. Yeah, you can take the other question. I will give you the full title of the book.
Thank you, sir. And so the next one we have got is, a problem I faced when implementing a robot is that due to the process time variations in the processor, my controller code does not work as I need.
Yeah.
What are the things I can do to eliminate this?
Very good question. I did not come to that level thinking that, I don't know, I didn't have an idea about the level of the audience. We will handle that in future, but for the time being, just to give you an answer, you need to have a real-time kernel implemented there. Can I get some more details if the person who has raised this question is already there in the audience? Can you make him to speak?
Yes, if the participant who has given us this question is present, you can now unmute yourselves and get this clarified.
Hello.
Can you? Hello, yeah, I can hear you. Can you tell me the question?
So I have employed simple PID controller algorithm in Arduino based processor. But the problem I face is, even though I have tuned it correctly, I think I have tuned it correctly, it does not work because sometimes the time it takes to run the whole process changes time to time. So because of that, the controller, I can't get out what I need from the controller.
Right. Now it is there are certain things that you can check. Firstly, whether your controller is correct, you need to check that one. Have you done any simulation on that?
Yes, I have done it, and that is working fine in MATLAB Simulink, but
Yeah. Now, which domain did you do the simulation? Is it in continuous domain or discrete domain?
Continuous domain.
Can you use the same sampling period that you have used in the Arduino and discretize it in the simulation and check whether the discretized model works?
Yes, I can do it, but I haven't done it.
You have to do that and identify the largest sampling period that you can run without any problem. I'm talking about the largest sampling period, not the smallest one, right? That you can theoretically also identify, because if you know the natural frequency of oscillation of the system, then that times h should be from 0.2 to 0.6. From that, you can find out the largest sum h that you can have. Put that in the simulation and see if you get the required performance. Because in this case, Arduino is a slow processor. You have to give time for it to do the calculations. Now, the only way to enable that is by increasing your sampling period, because otherwise it will take more time before it samples the next signal, right? That is the problem that you are facing as you are explaining. Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Is that mean that I want to change the sampling time of the controller, right?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Not just change, you have to increase the sampling period.
Okay, sir. I'll check.
Thank you, sir. And the next question we have got is, sir, can you point out the key factors that we should consider when applying motion controlling in robotics?
The number of axes that you need to handle at a given time. Because it is, for example, if you are talking about industrial manipulator, it is very common that you have 4 to 6 degrees of freedom in any manipulator nowadays. So that means you need to handle 4 to 6 axes at a given time. So that is the main concern, and also the processor that you are dealing with. Now the robotics, now if you go through the slides that I have presented, needs real-time calculations. One thing is they need time. Other very important thing is you can't do these things with fixed point processors. You need to go for floating point processors. So that is another important thing. And the third one, which is a bit practical one, is the sensors that you are using in the feedback loop. They have to be free from noise as much as possible. Probably you will have to have small RC filters introduced to the signal lines, or some measures to suppress the noise that is there. I mean, there are lots of ways of handling it, screening and things like that. You got to do all that to get with clean signals. Those are the things that one should be looking after.
Thank you, sir. And the next question is, how can we find the values for the parameters in PID controller in a practical scenario?
Yeah, that's what I told you. You have to conduct a Ziegler-Nichols test. You apply a step, and I just showed you one step response. Then you make the tangent and accordingly calculate L and A and use the table to find the parameters. And of course, if you use Ziegler-Nichols, you can fine tune them. That is how you need to do. I mean, you have to do one of them, otherwise it will not work. The other method, of course, you can do the the frequency-based approach, that is, you implement a proportional controller and increase the gain of that one, little by little until the output saturates. Output oscillates. That's the second test of Ziegler-Nichols. You have to do one of them and then tune the PID parameters there. If you don't have any of those things, there are other practical ways of doing it. I mean, if I tell you, you stop the integration, you stop the differentiation also, go to a proportional part, and then you increase the proportional controller in such a way that you get overshoot, and at that point you stop. You don't go for oscillation, and thereafter you have to start fine-tuning trial and error. But trial and error method I don't recommend because that can lead to disastrous results when you try to incorporate other loops to the full system. Now, robot is not just one motor controlling, there are many. So hand tuning is not recommended. The worst thing that you can do is Ziegler-Nichols. Don't go beyond that.
Thank you, sir. And the final question is how to deal with delays in measurements from sensors due to sampling delay and other processors in real-time applications.
Yeah, that's the only way to deal that is go for a real-time operating system on board. There are enough RTOS available. Get down one of those. There are freeware. You have to use that. Otherwise, you can't get rid of this one, especially with these slow processors that are there nowadays.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. With that, we conclude the Q&A session. I have a kind request to be made from all our participants. Please fill the feedback form we have given in the chat box. Your feedback is considered very valuable. You can access it now through the chat box. And with that, it's time to conclude our webinar, which was an immense success. On behalf of our society, I would like to thank Dr. Linantha Samaranayake for joining with us today, despite your busy schedules. We learned a lot about modeling, controller design, common problems in controllers, their solutions, and methods of implementing these controllers in microprocessors. Dear sir, please accept our token of appreciation presented to you by the Robotics and Automation Society of the University of Peradeniya.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Moreover, a huge thank you goes to all our participants who attended this evening. Without you, this event would not have been a success. Last but not least, I would like to thank all the members of our Robotics and Automation Society who have worked hard towards the success of this webinar, overseeing all the events. With that said, we have arrived at the end of the second phase of our pursuit for in-depth knowledge in robotics, and I'm sure that you have learned a lot from these webinars. Thanks for joining with Robotics 2021. Stay safe, everyone, and have a good night.
Thank you.